It has been my object in these lectures to give the substance of accepted knowledge pertaining to the leading events and characters of history, and in treating such a variety of subjects extending over a period of more than 6,000 years, each of which might fill a volume, I have sought to present what is true rather than what is new. Although most of these lectures have been delivered in some form during the last 40 years, in most of the cities, and in many of the literary institutions of this country, I have carefully revised them within the last few years, in order to avail myself of the latest light shed on the topics and times of which they treat. The revived and widespread attention given to the study of the Bible under the stimulus of recent Oriental travels and investigations, not only as a volume of religious guidance, but as an authentic record of most interesting and important events, has encouraged me to include a series of lectures on some of the remarkable men identified with Jewish history. Of course, I have not aimed at an exhaustive criticism in these biblical studies, since the topics cannot be exhausted even by the most learned scholars. But I have sought to interest intelligent Christians by a continuous narrative, interweaving with it the latest accessible knowledge bearing on the main subjects. If I have persisted in adhering to the truths that have been generally accepted for nearly 2,000 years, I have not disregarded the light which has been recently shed on important points by the great critics of the progressive schools. I have not aimed to be exhaustive or to give minute criticism on comparatively unimportant points, but the passions and interests which have agitated nations, the ideas which great men have declared, and the institutions which have grown out of them, have not, I trust, been uncandidly described, nor deductions from them illogically made, inasmuch as the interest in the development of those great ideas and movements, which we call civilization, centers in no slight degree in the men who were identified with them. I have endeavored to give a faithful picture of their lives in connection with the eras and institutions which they represent, whether they were philosophers, ecclesiastics, or men of action, and that we may not lose sight of the precious boons which illustrious benefactors have been instrumental in bestowing upon mankind. It has been my chief object to present their services, whatever may have been their defects, since it is for services that most great men are ultimately judged, especially kings and rulers. These services certainly constitute the gist of history, and it is these which I have aspired to show. It is my object in this book on the old pagan civilizations to present the salient points only, since an exhaustive work is impossible within the limits of these volumes. The practical end which I have in view is to collate a sufficient number of acknowledged facts from which to draw sound inferences in reference to the progress of the human race and the comparative welfare of nations in ancient and modern times. The first inquiry we naturally make is in regard to the various religious systems which were accepted by the ancient nations, since religion, in some form or other, is the most universal of institutions, and has had the earliest and the greatest influence on the condition and life of peoples, that is to say, on their civilizations, in every period of the world, and necessarily considering what is the object in religion, when we undertake to examine any particular form of it which has obtained among any people or at any period of time, we must ask, how far did its priests and sages teach exalted ideas of the deity, of the soul, and of immortality? How far did they arrive at lofty and immutable principles of morality? How far did religion, such as was taught, practically affect the lives of those who professed it, and lead them to just and reasonable treatment of one another, or to holy contemplation, or noble deeds, or sublime repose in anticipation of a higher and endless life. And how did various religions compare with what we believe to be the true religion? Christianity, in its pure and ennobling truths, its inspiring promises, and its quiet influence in changing and developing character. I assume that there is no such thing as a progressive Christianity, except insofar as mankind grow in the realization of its lofty principles. That there has not been and will not be any improvement on the ethics and spiritual truths revealed by Jesus the Christ, but that they will remain forever the standard of faith and practice. I assume also that Christianity has elements which are not to be found in any other religion, such as original teachings, divine revelations, and sublime truths. I know it is the fashion with many thinkers to maintain that improvements on the Christian system are both possible and probable, and that there is scarcely a truth with Christ, which Christ and his apostles declared, which cannot be found in some other ancient religion. When divested of the errors there incorporated with it, this notion I repudiate. I believe that systems of religion are perfect or imperfect, true or false, just so far as they agree or disagree with Christianity, and that to the end of time all systems are to be measured by the Christian standard and not Christianity by any other system. The oldest religion of which we have clear and authentic account is probably the pure monotheism held by the Jews. Some nations have claimed a higher antiquity for their religion, like the Egyptians and Chinese, than that which the sacred writings of the Hebrews show to have been communicated to Abraham and to earlier men of God treated of in those scriptures, but their claims are not entitled to our full credence. We are in doubt about them. The origin of religions is enshrouded in mystical darkness and is a mere speculation. Authentic history does not go back far enough to settle this point. The primitive religion of mankind I believe to have been revealed to inspired men who, like Shem, walked with God. Adam in paradise knew who God was, for he heard his voice. And so did Enoch and Noah, and more clearly than all, Abraham. They believed in a personal God, maker of heaven and earth, infinite in power, supreme in goodness, without beginning and without end, who exercises a providential oversight of the world which he made. It is certainly not unreasonable to claim the greatest purity and loftiness in the monotheistic faith of the Hebrew patriarchs, as handed down to his children by Abraham, over that of all other founders of ancient religious systems, not only since that faith was, as we believe, supernaturally communicated, but since the fruit of that stock, especially in its Christian development, is superior to all others. This sublime monotheism was ever maintained by the Hebrew race in all their wanderings, misfortunes, and triumphs, except on occasions when they partially adopted the gods of those nations with whom they came in contact and by whom they were corrupted and enslaved. But it is not my purpose to discuss the religion of the Jews in this connection, since it is treated in other volumes of this series, and since everybody has access to the Bible, the earlier portions of which give the true account, not only of the Hebrews and their special progenitor Abraham, but of the origin of the earth and of mankind, and most intelligent persons are familiar with its details. I begin my description of ancient religions with those systems which the Jews were more or less familiar, and by which they were more or less influenced, and whether these religions were, as I think themselves, corrupted forms of the primitive revelation to primitive man, or, as is held by some philosophers of today, natural developments out of an original worship of the powers of nature, of ghosts, of ancestral heroes, of tutelar deities, of household, family, tribe, nation, and so forth. It will not affect the relation to my plan of considering this background of history and its effects upon modern times through Judaism and Christianity.